echoes in the silo. The laughter still echoes in my mind. It was a cruel symphony at the dinner table, the kind that burrows into your soul and festers. "You're going to lose your mind, you know," my brother sneered, tossing his head back as if the very idea of my work was a joke. "Chasing shadows in abandoned silos? You'll disgrace the family." I had tried to explain myself, to share the urgency of my findings, the contaminated grain shipments, the mass hallucinations in those isolated farming towns, but they only saw a delusional fool. When I was fired from my job as a food safety inspector, they had relished my downfall, their jeering laughter still ringing in my ears. Years passed, and I was no longer the same person they had mocked. I immersed myself in the world of agro-paranormal epidemiology, where the lines between science and supernatural blurred. I studied mycotoxins like an alchemist distilling nightmares into reality, uncovering the horrifying truth behind those rural superstitions. I learned that the toxins did more than poison the body. They twisted the mind, warping perception until hallucinations became a collective reality. The isolation of those silos, the suffocating darkness, those became my sanctuaries. I was no longer an outcast. I was a seeker of truths, a whisperer of horrors. I earned recognition in the scientific community, but it was the kind that chilled the blood of those who dared to dismiss me. I had become a warning, a figure of dread who had survived the very darkness that had once been the subject of their ridicule. Now, I stood on the threshold of my childhood home, a familiar scent of hay and damp wood wafting through the air, mingling with the acrid tang of something far less innocent. I had come to confront them, to show them the weight of their disbelief. They would no longer see me as the fool. They would witness the truth that lay beyond their understanding. As I stepped inside, their faces fell. My mother's eyes, once filled with warmth, now reflected something akin to fear. "You look different," she whispered, her voice shaky. I had expected their reaction, but the reality of it shook me in ways I hadn't anticipated. They were afraid of me. "Different?" I echoed, a bitter smile creeping onto my lips. "Or enlightened." The tension built as I shared my findings, detailing the horrors I had witnessed. The stories of those communities, twisted by toxins, their minds unraveling in ways that defied logic. I spoke of the whispers in the silos, the shadows that danced just beyond the light, the hallucinations that turned friends into monsters. I watched as my family's expressions shifted from disbelief to something darker, an inkling of dread. Then came the moment I had anticipated, the culmination of my years of research and suffering. "You think it's all superstition?" I asked, leaning forward, my voice low and filled with certainty. "Then let me show you what's real." I reached into my bag and pulled out a small vial filled with a pale, greenish liquid that shimmered ominously in the light. "This is a concentrate of mycotoxins," I said, holding it aloft like a trophy. "The very essence of the madness I've studied. And it's not just a scientific curiosity. It's a weapon." Before they could protest, I uncapped the vial and let a few drops fall onto a piece of bread I had brought, the same kind that had poisoned so many. The air thickened with tension, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of understanding in their eyes, a fleeting glimpse of the horror I had faced. "Do you want to see?" I asked, almost playfully, but with an edge of desperation. "Do you want to know what it feels like to confront the darkness?" My brother stepped back, shaking his head. "You're insane! You can't!" But it was too late. The effects were almost immediate. The shadows in the room began to twist and pulse, feeding off the fear that radiated from my family. Their faces contorted in confusion, and I felt a surge of satisfaction mingled with something darker. Suddenly, the walls of the house seemed to breathe. the very structure warping and shifting as if it were alive. My family's laughter transformed into shrieks of terror, their mocking words echoing around us like a haunting refrain. They clutched at each other, their faces pale and wide-eyed as the visions began to invade their minds. "Stop it!" my mother cried, but I could only watch, a spectator to the horror I had unleashed. The shadows grew thicker, wrapping around them like a shroud. I could hear the whispers now, the voices of those I had encountered in the silos, the ones who had been lost to madness. They echoed my family's ridicule, taunting them with their own disbelief. As they fell to their knees, I felt the weight of vindication wash over me. I had survived the darkness. I had wrestled with it and emerged transformed. But in that moment, as I watched my family crumble before the very horrors they had dismissed, I felt a pang of sorrow. It was not just their mockery that had brought them to this point. It was their inability to accept what lay beyond their comprehension. They had pushed me away, and now they were being consumed by the very shadows I had learned to navigate. As the visions began to fade, I turned to leave, the weight of my family's despair heavy in my heart. I had come to show them the truth, but instead, I had gifted them a nightmare. I stepped outside, the sunlight hitting my face like a balm, the echoes of their terror still resonating in my mind. In that moment, I understood. Vindication could be a double-edged sword. I had faced the darkness and returned, but at what cost? I had become a harbinger of horrors, a reminder that some truths are best left buried in the silos of the mind. As I walked away, I could still hear their screams, a haunting reminder of the price of disbelief. Sponsor. While crafting your chilling first-person horror story about familial mockery and uncovered truths, consider the real-world implications of exposure science and environmental health. What hidden horrors might be lurking unseen, impacting our well-being? Perhaps a deeper understanding could prevent future tragedies. Explore the cutting-edge research by getting a 1-year subscription, Journal of Exposure Science and Environmental Epidemiology. Gain insights into exposure assessment and its impact on public health, and maybe find some inspiration for your story's underlying terrors. Stay at the forefront of environmental health while writing your story.